Samwise Gamgee. Anyone? All right. Got a couple nods. It's not a huge crowd that knows Samwise, but enough that I feel confident this sermon might work. I want to talk about Samwise Gamgee this morning. For those of you who do not yet know this marvelous hobbit, Samwise comes from Lord of the Rings. He is the great companion of Frodo Baggins, who brings the ring to Mount Doom in order for it to be destroyed. Sam is a simple hobbit. He loves good food, he likes to tend his garden, and he is a very loyal friend. Sam goes on a quest with Frodo, a very scary quest, through sometimes beautiful land and often really dark and desolate places. And he does it because he does not want his friend Frodo to be alone. Near the very end of Lord of the Rings, you have this scene where Frodo and Sam go into a very scary cave. Those of you who don't like spiders, get ready. Where a very big, disgusting spider pricks Frodo, makes him seem as though he is dead, and wraps him up, and she's about to feast on him when Sauron's orcs come, find Frodo, and carry him away. But before they carry Frodo away, Sam, in his wisdom, realizes the ring that Frodo bears cannot get into the hands of the enemy. So he takes the ring which he has seen tempting Frodo and bearing weight on Frodo for a long time now, he takes upon himself because he knows he needs to do his best to fulfill the destruction of the ring that Frodo had begun. And here we find the temptation of Samwise Gamgee. And I want to talk about it a bit today because today we are talking about temptation, and when I think temptation, I can't think of a better example than this, so you're stuck hearing about Lord of the Rings. So let me read to you what the temptation is like for Sam as the ring sits around his neck. Already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to overthrow Barad-dûr. And then all the clouds rolled away, and the white sun shone, and at his command the Vale of Gorgoroth became a garden of flowers and trees and brought forth fruit. He had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own, and then all this could be. So here we have two temptations for Samwise. The first is that he is Samwise the Strong, the hero overthrowing the enemy's great stronghold with throngs of armies at his side. The second, which is my favorite, the second temptation is Samwise the Master Gardener, bringing life to a scorched land, bringing life to a place where there is death. What I want you to notice is that neither of the temptations themselves are bad or evil or wicked. To overthrow the enemy would be a very good thing for Middle-earth. And to bring life and garden to desolate places is a beautiful vision. But it isn't what Sam is supposed to do. The temptation is Sam doing what he knows he is not called to do in this moment. And then the next paragraph, we see how Sam resists the temptation. And I want you, this will be my last of Lord of the Rings, I promise. I want you to hear this. In that hour of trial, it was the love of his master that helped most to hold him firm. But also deep down in him lived still unconquered his plain hobbit sense. He knew in the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden, even if such visions were not a mere cheat to betray him. The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm, his own hands to use, not the hands of others to command. Sam resists the temptation of the ring by holding to two things greater than the desire to be the hero and the master gardener. The first is his love for his friend Frodo, the one he has committed to be on this quest with. The second is his plain hobbit sense, which is that he knows himself well enough to know both what he needs and does not need, to know who he is. He doesn't need a whole realm of a garden. All he needs is one small garden, tended by a free gardener. We see something similar, though, in a much grander scale in the gospel reading today with Jesus' temptation. I'm sure there are many sermons across Stillwater and the Twin Cities and the greater church about these three temptations. We're not going to go into them in detail this morning, but I want you to see how the temptations work. The first, we have to remember that Jesus goes out into the wilderness fasting. He's hungry. Sometimes we sell short that Jesus was human. He got really hungry. He had been fasting for a long time. I miss breakfast and I get cranky. This is much bigger than that. And the devil first tempts him with food. He says, "You're hungry? You can turn this rock to bread. Go for it, man. Feed yourself." And I'm sure that was tempting. And I'm also sure, I know Jesus made really good wine. I'm pretty sure he could make a pretty good loaf of bread. That this was probably a real temptation. But Jesus knows that this time for him is a time of feasting, of fasting and not feasting. That in this moment, what he's meant to eat is not physical, but spiritual food. It doesn't undo the fact that he's hungry, but he knows what he most needs in the moment. Then Jesus is tempted again. He is weak. He's at the very beginning of his ministry. He was just baptized. And the devil tempts Jesus with power. I don't know if you've ever had someone annoying taunting you, but sometimes you want to show what you got. The devil's saying, "What you got, man? Show me what you got." Jesus knows that only God the Father, not a creature like the devil, has the authority to give true power. And he knows that the one who gives him true power has said, "Now is not yet the time." So he holds and resists that temptation to basically show off because he knows the time is not yet. Finally, Jesus is tired. He is weary. I don't know why, but I imagine he wants a nap at this point with temptations. And the devil tempts Jesus by challenging death. Now, Jesus' ministry includes challenging death. That's part of what he does. That's where we're leading up to in Holy Week at the beginning of this blessed Lent. But Jesus knows now is the right time. And as someone who struggles with impatience, I feel like this is the temptation of impatience. Why not just do it now? Why not just show what yourself capable by throwing yourself off this cliff and seeing what you can do? But Jesus knows this is not the right time to demonstrate the fullness of who he is. So temptation is not always something bad. It's just not something appropriate. Temptation, here's my definition, I'll read it twice, is anything that veers us off course from the fact that we are creatures, created, dependent, and in need of God, our creator, sustainer, and redeemer. Again, temptation is anything that veers us off course from the fact that we are creatures, created, dependent, and in need of God, our creator, sustainer, and redeemer. Rowan Williams, arguably, and I would argue the greatest living theologian, says it this way: the basic form of the sin from which we need to be delivered is the myth of self-sufficiency. The temptation of self-sufficiency can come in many forms. It can come in substances, controlled or not, legal or not, to help us manage our emotions and our big feelings. It can come in doom scrolling and binge TV watching to help us ignore and avoid the reality that we find ourselves in. Temptation can come in manipulating people and situations out of fear of our needs not being met, feeding our judgment, our impatience, and anger in times that don't call for impatience, but patience, reflection, and discernment. Temptation can look like using food as self-soothing or resisting food as a means of control. Temptation can be condemning others to distract from our own shortcomings, or refusing to forgive others as we've been forgiven, or failing to pray, even when the prayer that's required is simply, please help. Often, temptation becomes easy when we forget. Had Samwise forgot his quest and his love for Frodo and who he was as a hobbit, the ring might have won out. Had Jesus forgotten who he was and who he had been called by and what season he was in, the devil's temptation might, probably not, have worked. Remembering seems a key part of resisting temptation. And that brings us to one of my favorite books of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy. Maybe surprising, not the most exciting book. It's essentially just big two speeches from Moses. And it's kind of like what I'm doing now. Moses is looking over the promised land with ancient Israel, who have been wandering for generations waiting to arrive. We are at the moment of beginning, much like Jesus at the beginning of his ministry. And Deuteronomy is two extended speeches that are basically about not forgetting. So what we read today is a mandate, and it's a simple one, that when they arrive in the land, they should gather up and bring gifts to God in a holy place. And in that place to remember and to celebrate what God has done. Does that sound familiar? Anything like what we're doing today? And one of the things that they are called to remember is this wandering Aramean. Does anyone know who that is besides Jan? It's Jacob. Jacob, it's actually one of the oldest lines of the whole Old Testament, is this remembering of the wandering man who then became a great nation. And from that great nation goes into Egypt, is then enslaved, God liberates them. It's very important that these people remember who they are and what God has done. Because God knows us, and he knows how easily we forget. And when we forget, how easily we are tempted to something less than what we deserve and who we are. Sometimes temptation can be obviously bad. No good, harmful, don't do that. But sometimes it can also be seemingly good, like planting gardens in Mordor. Remembering what God has done reminds us of what we are and what we are not. Remembering protects us from forgetfulness. Forgetfulness makes us ready victims of succumbing to temptation. What we do together, especially in this season of Lent, is to remember. Yes, like we remembered on Wednesday, that we are dust, but also that God created, sustains, and perfects us in love. To remember that you are loved, that you are beloved, makes it so much easier not to be self-sufficient. To remember that you are loved, that you are beloved, makes it so much easier not to strive, to manipulate, to shortcut, and to coerce. To remember that you are beloved reminds us with a kind of plain Hobbit sense of who we are and who we love. Let it be so, Lord. Amen.